I was on Piers Morgan's show earlier today, and I will confess to you that I get asked to go on there a lot, but I really hate being on panels. I just have I won't do panels. Like if you see me on cable, it'll be just myself. I'll do a one-on-one debate. But to be like on a panel with like 5 windows and you have to like scream and yell, it's just so undignified and degrading and worthless. I don't know why I decided to say yes today. I think it was because they told me that I could debate Dan Crenshaw on Ukraine. They were honest. They didn't deceive me. They told me who else was going to be there. And I said yes, knowing I shouldn't. But there were a couple moments where I think it was constructive. One of which was when I first spoke and I tried to explain not just the importance of Trump opening communication with Russia after it had been closed so dangerously for years, but also the fact that the American people ratified what Trump is doing with respect to Ukraine. Here's how I describe this.
To the panel now. Glenn Greenwald, great to have you back on Uncensored. What do you make of this? I mean, Trump, at the very least, what he's done is immediately re-establish diplomatic ties with Russia. Do you think that's a good move?
I actually do think it's good for the two countries with the world's largest nuclear stockpiles that have come close to nuclear Armageddon in the past to actually speak to one another. I think one of the worst parts of the last decade in Washington, the Russiagate hoax and all of that, was that it created a climate where it was almost criminal for American officials to speak to Russians. Even during the Cold War, when we viewed each other as existential threats, we had all sorts of open communication. The Russians would come to the United States. We would hear from their leaders. Our leaders would go over there and speak. Of course, these kinds of communications are vital. Trump deserves a lot of credit for opening that up. It's dangerous to the world when the Russians and the Americans don't speak. And I think we have to begin with, since we all love democracy here so much, we're all so eager to advance it around the world in between arming and propping up the Saudis and Egyptians. But in general, we're good people. We love democracy. We just had an election in 2024 in which the winning candidate, Donald Trump, went around saying, not as an ancillary view, but as central to his campaign, it's time that we keep American money in the United States for American citizens. We have to stop funding all of these foreign wars where our country's not at risk, and specifically said he wants to end the war in Ukraine. The Biden-Kamala Harris view, the view of the Democratic Party, was no, we can't talk to the Russians. We have to fund Ukraine until the very last Ukrainian is dead in order to expel all Russian troops from Ukrainian soil. A complete pipe dream from the start. And Americans voted for the candidate who said he wanted to end U.S. involvement in the war. That should matter if we love democracy so much. Americans, and I think that's what Trump, above everything, whether you disagree with him or agree with him, and I have both, is following through on what he promised he would do in the campaign. And that kind of responsiveness democratically in the United States is very rare to see.
Yeah. And then Piers went on and talked about this brilliant tweet that he posted about how it's weird to see liberals angry that Trump's trying to end 2 wars and how it went so viral and millions of people read it. So that was the view I laid out. But then I had this pretty contentious exchange with Dan Crenshaw. And I have to say, just looking at things from where I am, I really, sometimes people in Washington pursue policies and make claims that you almost have to believe they're so deluded. They live in a complete bubble where they just, this conventional wisdom takes hold and they don't realize how much dissent there is outside of that bubble. And they're able to believe things that they want to pretend to believe, that they have to say to justify what they're doing, that it's hard to believe they really believe. And I want to show you this argument I had with Dan Crenshaw about Ukraine and NATO war and U.S. war, funding of the war, and what's happening in that war, because it so exemplifies to me how, I don't know, how willing these people are to say blatantly untrue things, as I'll show you.
Every single day.
I just think we should save our fury about whether Ukraine get included or not for when they actually get excluded.
Can I just assert a little bit of realism into the conversation? Yes. Because I know Dan started off by saying, "Oh, Russia's this crappy little second-rate power. We have to flatter them and make them think they matter, but they really don't. They're really weak." It's always a pretty weird contradiction to simultaneously say that and then at the same time warn that Russia's going to start invading Western Europe, this crappy little second-rate power. But the reality is, this is the reality whether you like it or not, Russia has fought a war now for 3 years against unified NATO and the United States, pouring hundreds of billions of dollars and highly sophisticated weapons into Ukraine, and the front line continues to move westward, not eastward, where the Russians are gaining more and more territory. More and more Ukrainians are being killed. There are fewer Ukrainian men left in that country who want to fight. They're being forcibly dragged in there and used as cannon fodder, or they're fleeing and risking their lives to do it. The reality is Russia is winning the war or has won the war. And you can say, oh, you must be a Kremlin agent to say that.
Well, you just got to know nothing about military information or tactics. That's what you have to do to say that. You just have to know nothing.
So the idea that
is clearly what you do.
Yeah, well,
I mean, you've got so many facts wrong. It's hard to know where to even start.
You can. You think Ukraine is winning the war? In which direction is the front line moved, Dan? Has it moved westward or eastward?
It depends on where you're looking at.
The front line is collapsing.
I hate to break it to you, but it depends on where you're looking at. And the ratios of Russian deaths to Ukrainian deaths is like 4-1. You just don't know what you're talking about. You've never fought anything. You don't know anything about the military.
I fought a lot of things. I fought a lot of things.
Oh, you fought a lot of things?
Just because you were in the military doesn't make you an expert. I'm sorry to say that Donald Trump
I don't need to be an expert. I just know basic facts and I have all the briefings on it. I don't think you do.
Clearly Russia is winning the war. The Ukrainians don't even want to go and fight this war any longer. They're fleeing the country.
It's a war of attrition with a stalemate. That's what we're looking at right now. That's the most honest way to look at it.
I'm sorry to say, one of the things that I know that you don't actually have to go join the military to understand is that Russia is many, many, many times larger than Ukraine. And that's the reason why the most prescient geopolitical experts, people have been on this show, I've interviewed them many times, people like John Mearsheimer and Jeffrey Sachs and Stephen Wald, all said since 2022, Ukraine will inevitably lose this war and Russia will win it. And I'll tell you why. This is the one point I want to make. When President Obama was on his way out of office in 2016, Jeffrey Goldberg interviewed him for a cover story on the Obama foreign policy doctrine. And he criticized Obama for not standing up to Russia in Syria and in Ukraine. And what Obama said was, the reality is Ukraine is and always has been and always will be a vital interest to Russia because it's right on the other side of their border. And it has never been and never will be a vital interest to the United States. So the idea that we're going to confront Russia or go to war with Russia over who governs various provinces in eastern Ukraine is absolute madness.
All right,
and President Obama was absolutely right, and President Trump thinks that too.
All right.
Okay, now, honestly, I did not expect to be challenged on the extremely well-documented fact that we've reported many times on this show that the Ukrainian front line is crumbling, that the Russians are gaining more and more territory. Everybody admits this to Ukraine, but you're on the show and you have some guy there saying like, I fought in a war, I get briefings. You have no idea what you're talking about. And I've read all of these reports, I've covered them, I've talked about them. And so I told him at some point, like, once we're done with the segment, I'm gonna shove all those reports in your face that are from pro-Ukraine media outlets in the West, even the ones that have been cheering this war from the start, that admit all of what I just said. Because anyone can say anything when they're on one of those shows. In a one-on-one debate, you can engage it more. I would have pulled up those articles. I would have read them right to his face. But when you're on a panel with a bunch of people screaming, it's very difficult. Just to give you a few examples of what I mean, here's The Economist, the British magazine that's extremely pro-NATO and pro-Ukraine. Just a week ago, or last month rather, January 27th, amid talks of a ceasefire, Ukraine's front line is, what's that word? Crumbling. Ukraine's front line is crumbling. You can find articles of this kind in The Economist, despite being extremely pro-Ukraine, for at least the last 6 months. Here from France 24, a French mainstream newspaper. This was from December 31st, 2024, so just 2 months ago, less than 2 months ago. Russian advances in Ukraine grew sevenfold in 2024, the data shows. I'm sorry, what about the Russian advances in Ukraine? Oh, they grew sevenfold in 2024, the data shows. Russia advanced by almost 4,000 square kilometers, 1,500 miles in Ukraine in 2024, 7 times more than in 2023, an AFP analysis of data from the Institute of the Study of War showed Tuesday. So think about what that's like. You're in a debate with a member of Congress who votes for these wars, who funds these wars, who defends these wars. Dan Crenshaw is one of these Republicans like Tom Cotton who despises Trump's foreign policy, despises the MAGA ideology, but has to pretend that he's on board with it because he knows he can't thrive or survive in the Republican Party if he admits that he prefers Bill Kristol and Chuck Schumer's foreign policy to Trump's, which is absolutely the case with them. But just, you're sitting there and you're trying to have a debate about the war, and you're saying what you know is true. That Russia's gains are significant. They're moving. The Ukraine front line is collapsing. And then some guy tells you, you never fought in a war. You have no idea what we're talking about. I got briefings. That's not true. Here from BBC, November 20th. Ukraine front could, quote, collapse as Russian gains accelerate, experts warn. Here from The Guardian, January 16th. Quote, their human resources are unlimited. Russia's advances signal a bleak spring for Ukrainians. If Moscow forces manage to take all of the Donetsk Oblast, it would be a symbolic moment for Putin and for Kiev. And I could just go on and on. I know you've seen these before. We've covered them many times. I had so many people on this show in 2022. Mearsheimer and Walt and Jeffrey Sachs and others who tried to say, look, this is madness. The U.S. and NATO are never going to help Ukraine drive out every Russian troop from Ukrainian soil. They would go to nuclear war before they gave up Crimea because of how crucial it is not to have NATO control that access to the Black Sea. And they're going to protect their Russian-speaking ethnic Russians who are loyal to Moscow in the eastern provinces of Ukraine, who have been increasingly repressed. NATO's all over Ukraine. We did a coup in 2014 there. Biden was micromanaging it. Remember that call that he had where he talked about it, he bragged how he called up and said, I want this prosecutor fired, and if you don't fire them, we're going to withhold $1 billion. We've been micromanaging this country right on the other side of the Russian border, the most sensitive part of their border, while threatening to move NATO, which includes Germany, eastward right up to the Russian border. And we've known forever that that would be extremely provocative, not just to Putin, but to all Russians. Obviously, if China put an adverse antagonistic military alliance in Mexico and then engineered a coup to put in a pro-China leader who was more hostile to the U.S. and had intelligence officials buzzing all over that place, the Dan Crenshaws of the world would be insisting we go to war to force China out of there. But they can't apply these principles consistently to other countries. They can't look at things from anyone else's perspective but theirs. They're so drowning in propaganda to the point where they just say things that are blatantly untrue. That is what Washington is. That is what the bipartisan foreign policy consensus, the blob, has been for so long. It's the reason that it's been so destructive. These people are imbeciles. They're ideologues. They live in a fairy tale. They can't face reality. They have a perception of themselves in the United States that nobody in the world shares outside of Paris and London and Berlin, maybe. And you see it when you confront them. I couldn't believe it. I really couldn't believe it. I knew saying Russia was winning the war was going to be provocative, but I never expected them to deny it factually. I thought, no, if we send more, well, whatever. I thought they were going to say something like that. To deny these reports that are all over the place, including very, very pro-Ukraine Western media outlets, that everybody admits, you just can't believe it. And yet that's the people who have been running U.S. foreign policy and their ideology for a long, long time. And it's the reason why our treasury has been drained. We've destroyed so many things around the world, never for any gain other than for a few companies in the military-industrial complex and a few ideologues like that. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.